The political theological error of Zizek in connection to the road to the essence of Leo Strauss's thinking. Zizek has a position which is subtly askew from the truth and requires some detailed description and explication to make clear to the thinking part of the community. Note, generally speaking, most people don't have any sensitivity to thought, just as many do not have a great sensitivity to music or to other human pursuits. However, largely speaking, I think that, to use the analogy of music, even those of us who have no sense of music can nonetheless distinguish between stupid popular entertainment / music and serious music. Further subnote, music is only of recent ennoble I don't know how to form the word that should go along with this, as ennoblation, I'll say, to create the language sort of allows me to do that. So it's reason has only been valorized as something within music in recent times. So probably actually, let's restate that. Reason during the Catholic period was in some ways seen to be the core of music. In other words, somebody like Bach or the Palestrina controversy, which came up in the one of the great meetings of the Catholic Church, had to do with whether or not music was a rational instrument. They're getting to the opening the way to transcendence and to God, conceived of by the Catholics. Then this issue of the Romanticism, when it started to open its gate, let's say around the time Bach was still alive, let's say. So around 1750, let's say it started up. Then you get this other idea of music, which reaches probably its zenith in people like Schopenhauer, and then it scatters and is probably destroyed in Wagner or so. Wagner already has an element of the decay and the sort of entertainment feature in his music. So keeping that before us, we can nonetheless somehow distinguish in some way serious music from trashy entertainment, even if we have no real sense of music. So I think it's the same with thinking. We can sort of tell, even those of us who have no sense of thinking or philosophy, that some thinkers are better than others, more serious. So in that sense, even for those, what I want to put forward should in some way be accessible even to those amongst us who don't have a special sense for thinking, so Zizek is saying that he's taking a specific position amongst the historicist pale male, which thought finds itself in. Always and again, in approaching these issues, instead of doing a rigmarole, I find it's better to, even if there's some awkwardness in it, to bring out what occurs to me as I try to investigate the issue. So, for instance, I think in the popular discussion, you have one big error, a gross error, is this quote unquote attack on Marx. So we could give Jordan Peterson, for instance, some charity to his position and understand it in a more friendly way. But nonetheless, however we understand it, I think it's basically it's an uneducated and silly position, because he constantly attacks the so-called postmodernism, Foucault, Derrida, and so on, without the slightest insight that this is merely a band-aid. Some people try to produce a band-aid for the historicist condition, which exists whether or not you could get rid of the band-aid, but you still have the wound, and then you have to try to find some other way to solve it. The basic wound is that we no longer consider that a physicist or any other scientist can come forward and tell us anything scientific about good and evil. So that's it. That's the simplest statement of the difficulty. Then some people would come in and try to solve that wound in one way or another. It's inadequate, obviously, but attacking the doctor, the physician, is not particularly helpful. So Zizek, amongst this historicist position, comes in and he says, we have the right to understand our own position in a universal way. So he starts with the more or less hard example, which is, he says, prior to Marx understanding the class situation as the war of the classes as being the prime mover in history through its external natural development, which one should point out, Marx only in an equivocal way, in a nuanced way, favors the exterior over the idea. His reversal of Hegel isn't to throw out rationality, but it's only he rethinks it through the lens of physical labor as being the main issue, which is laid out also in John Locke. We can understand Locke here as somebody who lapsed from the Prussian thinking. So the Prussian thinking of historicism, which is in effect the center of the cosmos of all thought, because it's the origin of the first awareness of this historicist problem, which controls the thinking of the world. Locke was affected by that, but he kind of lapsed out of it into, again, what Heidegger's calling an Antic thinking, into the thinking of the sense data and so on. So Zizek is giving as the example that Marx has at a certain moment thought this class analysis and the labor analysis that all human value is due to labor back into history, but only at that moment does it become retroactively true in the past. So this is in this very interesting debate, which is picking up during COVID between uh, the representatives of Chomsky, who represent Chomsky, to Zizek, who is willing to enter into the debate. Well, Chomsky's quite a bit older than Zizek. And Zizek is willing to give him some respect, whereas Chomsky gives no respect to Zizek, but that's somewhat understandable. In this debate, there came up this issue of Bruno Latour giving the example of Pharaoh, who came down with some virus, some disease of some kind. I can't remember exactly what it was. And then Latour says it's only retroactively that we understand him as having that disease. And Chomsky finds this being sort of an MIT guy. He finds this ridiculous. Of course, he regards the disease as always having existed. But as soon as you think about it in social, political terms, you can see that it's obviously, there's some sense to the Latour view, and you can see it, there's a greater sense to it the more you become favorable to the Prussian thinking. A simple example of that, which I don't see why Chomsky wouldn't accept it, was if you see a picture of your wife when she was 6 years old, would you say that was your wife? No, that's the person who would later on become your wife. Because otherwise you're a pedophile or something like that, right? No, so in the same way, this substantive change, the same change which we get in the mass, the transubstantiation, is in play, or at least if we want to regard it through the Catholic view, which would become, we have to present it slightly differently from the Prussian point of view, because the Catholic view fundamentally, hermetically seals itself off against historicism, although it's nonetheless, in some ways, demonstrably moving within historicism, within this pulse of historicism nonetheless. If you would admit that substantive changes of this kind occur, so that this 6-year-old girl is not your wife, but then at a certain time she becomes your wife, and then retroactively you could understand her as the person that would become your wife, looking back at the past. In the same way, this Latour and Zizek thinking is happening, and then Zizek is going on to take this historicist position that universal morality can be the level that's currently being reached. For instance, he gives this example of rape. It can be retroactively discovered in the past and it will still be valid. Then n number of considerations come in, and the current destruction of monuments and so on comes in, and the whole discussion we've gone into before. Zizek says of this debate with Chomsky that the debate will come at the same time. Amusingly, he, just to throw in one of his jokes, that at the same time that Trump would be willing to sit down and have a meeting face-to-face with AOC and the Democrats and slosh things out, then we'll meet with Chomsky. So there's something here which we have to think through in order to situate ourselves with the Strauss situation. So we need to know, where is the enlightened? So Strauss is saying, on one side, there's enlightenment thinking, which has gone really far in a polemical sense. It's bent itself out of shape. And then on the other side, there's this romanticism. So these are two phenomena which Zizek would say, in a sort of Hegelian sense, are self-determining one another. Where is this space then of the Spinozian so-called freedom, which stands between them, and the Straussian freedom? So that reason must, reason which obviously exists in some sense, simply in the sense that we, from our own veracity and intellectual probity, think that we're making sense when we testify to ourselves. Reason has to reassert itself on a basic ground, in some manner, but not in the manner that goes out too far into this co-determining of the polemical positions, which have an uncertain connection to, what could we contrast them with other than the so-called notion of real interests. Real interests are always a funny concept, because we speak of real interest, but then people can have, just as in the symposium, we can show that eros can mean lust, but eros can also mean the Sacred Heart in its highest form. In other words, the Logos' own lust for Christ consciousness, as it were. These get into some difficulties here. I think I'll immediately do something following this on questions of faith. But so there's this question that I wanted to go into a little bit, is sort of, what are the sides here? There's somebody like Dawkins, who uses ridicule in favor, supposedly as a champion of enlightenment. But then there's somebody like Chomsky, who is more, who denies that there's any sense to saying that objects that have recently been discovered and are part of recent scientific practices that we regard a certain virus under a certain research program in the university, in the life sciences department, or wherever it's happening, as always having existed, and we regard as unintelligible the claim of Latour or somebody on those lines that they didn't always exist. And what are the details that we're getting into there? So I know I said it last time, but I'm going to do it right away, I think, is say something about what is faith as it connects to this Leo Strauss problem with Spinoza, and Spinoza's attempt to faithfully or lovingly and loyally reshape Judaism.